It's kind of hard to find the saving grace with all this. It's a whole lot of nothing. They spent the first third, literally the first third of the event, showcasing Concord, which just, no part of it looks like it's gonna work. And I'm trying to find the silver lining. I just can't find it. I don't know what I'm supposed to look at that's like really good. You're showing me, oh, well, we're gonna have cinematics to develop their stories. Okay, but that's not in the game. That's a cinematic that starts, did they say weekly? You know, so like, okay, that's just gonna make me wish we had a different game. If it's really good, it's just gonna make me wish that we had a single player narrative game that did that instead of a 5v5. You know? Yeah, Concord will be on PC too. Yeah, again, they're just hoping for another Helldivers situation. They're hoping that they can launch this, people try it, and it clicks and it finds overwhelming success, and people just start eating it up. Helldivers 2, though, I think to assume that you can just replicate that easily is foolhardy. I think that that's a little ridiculous. The reason why Helldivers 2 popped off is it came out at like the perfect time. People were coming out of Hell World. It appealed to PC gamers. It's very memeable and community driven. No part of a 5v5 hero shooter is like community driven. It's just not. Like in Helldivers, part of the fun was that everybody could work together to achieve certain goals, like clear this planet with all the missions. Okay, we cleared it. Now we all get rewards by doing that. So it's community driven to actually progress the meta narrative of the game and the story. With this, none of that's the case. It's just an Overwatch ripoff that has some different coats of paint. Like there's just nothing really clear to hook you. Yeah, I don't think people understand just how powerful that meme ability was. That was crucial. That was crucial for Helldivers 2 popping off, but this just doesn't have any of that. Like, what are you gonna do? Clip one of the funny, interesting quips from one of the characters? Wow, they said something so badass and witty. Oh, baby. Again, I don't really know what I was expecting, but I was still somehow expecting a bit more than what Concord brought. Because like in their online posts, they were saying, yeah, we're trying to make sure that players can tell stories with each other every time they log in and all that. And it's like, okay, interesting. But what does that mean? And now we see, oh, it just means it's a 5v5 shooter and that's it. Like that's all there is. It's just marketing crap. Yep. Rock, good to see you, my friend. Yeah, in Shinobi Drip, you're right. In Helldivers, you actually make your own cinematics. Yeah, there's been, if you've ever played that game, you know, there's moments where you'll do something crazy and you clip it and you're like, that was freaking cool. You know, it's just awesome. Leo, thank you for the 4 months. I'm unsubscribing from your channel if you don't review Infinity Nikki. Well, it sounds like you forced my hand. Sounds like I have to. I mentioned before, guys, we are doing critiques. I don't know if you guys were here for that stream, but we are doing critiques. We're going to kick those off again. My goal is for the next one, it'll go up while I'm like the gap when I'm on vacation in early July for the 4th of July. So sometime early July, that critique will go up. And we're going to be relaunching the Patreon as part of that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to basically just open it up to patron votes to vote for the next critique. So straight up, if everybody voted for me to do Infinity Nikki or whatever it was called, well, that's what the patrons decided. So that's what we're going to do. And we do a massive critique on a game where you play a woman with a bunch of walking and talking cats. And I think it would be funny, but we would do it. So yeah, I'm excited to get back into the critiques and stuff. It's going to be good. We found a way to structure it where it will make sense. And I mean, depending on what levels and tiers we hit in terms of patron support and stuff, we could reasonably get to the point where like, if we reach a certain level and, you know, people vote for like a freaking critique of Concord or something, we could straight up go and reach out to the devs and see if we could go fly as a team. We could fly to the studio and film interviews with devs and stuff. And so we do a critique documentary hybrid, and we could do all sorts of really cool stuff with it, which I think would be so freaking cool if we could pull that off. Like, just imagine how awesome that would be. Like, oh, we want to do a Path of Exile 2 critique. Okay, well, let's me and my agent and everybody, we will contact the devs. We'll try to organize like the interviews with the devs, and then we could actually pitch some of the thoughts of what we thought of the game and maybe constructive critiques and stuff. We could even ask them, why was this choice made? Why did you do it this way instead of this way? And then get their actual feedback. It could be really, really cool, I think. I mean, this is in the nicest way. Please don't do Concord. Well, that's the great thing, Gunnar Dan. I won't really get to decide. Like, it'll be up to viewer votes, or patron votes rather. So like, if everybody votes for Concord, we'll do Concord. If everybody votes for Infinity Nikki, we do that. If everybody votes to go back and retroactively do Hellblade 2, like, we do that. So there's all sorts of cool stuff we can do. He took my thing. Red flag, red flag.
16 times the detail.
So this is a section of the game from when I was playing last night for this main channel video that we did. So we're a little bit in. I mean, we're probably like 4 going on 5 hours. I'm not sure exactly. I dinked around a lot, did a lot of
Hey guys, Hitman89 here. I hope you're doing great. Last week we covered the best Xbox games. If you missed it, check out the video. And today we're gonna be diving into Lords of the Fallen 7 months after its rough launch. Because in case you forgot, it had a lot of performance issues, many bugs, and plenty of other frustrating problems. But since the game had over 30 updates, and now that it's coming to Game Pass, I thought I'd check it out again on all platforms in order to answer the following question. Is Lords of the Fallen good now? Let's find out. Compared to the day one version, on PS5, the frame rate is now much better. It still has noticeable dips every now and then, but it's definitely playable. On Series X though, if you played the game day one, you would know there was a serious issue where the game would basically turn into a slideshow for like 3 seconds. I have some good news and some bad news. Starting with the good news, the slideshow issue is gone. The bad news is that now, instead, the game freezes for a second before it goes back to normal, and the frame rate is never really stable, just like on PS5. Now, when it comes to the PC version, I have a 4080 and I played at 4K with the DLSS set to balanced and maxed out graphics, and I got 70 frames per second. But again, the problem is the stuttering. Long story short, performance still sucks dick. It's unbelievable how incompetent the devs have to be to release more than 30 patches and still not fix the performance in 7 months. That being said, can we take a moment to appreciate how insane the PC version looks? I mean, the game looks fine on console, especially considering it has 2 worlds, Axiom, the world of the living, and Umbral, the realm of the dead. Not a huge fan of Umbral, by the way. It looks bad, makes the game run even worse, and everything kinda looks the same in this world. By the way, another thing that still hasn't been fixed is the bugs. Even though it's not game breaking, you'll see stuff like this guy floating in the air like he just doesn't care, or this bug where instead of falling, an enemy would get stuck in the planks. I've seen these bugs day one, and I'm still seeing them now on all 3 platforms. Wait, did that guy just teleport? Yeah, what the fuck was that? Oh, and guys, if you like brutally honest reviews and you want me to make these regularly, show your support with a subscription. You know, you guys help me out with a subscription and I provide you with the content. I guess that's how it works, right? What the fuck am I doing? Anyway, Lords of the Fallen's got many classes, tons of weapons and possible builds. I tried a few and I really like the combat. I mean, when the lock-on system works properly. Speaking of combat, the levels that beat the bosses are always harder than the actual boss fights. A couple of them can be really challenging, but for the most part, you'll beat them within 1 or 2 tries. And that's because they keep on using the same moves, which makes them pretty easy to learn by heart. And when playing this game, you'll notice that vestige points, which are the equivalent of bonfires in a Dark Souls game, they're way too far from each other, so you have to use umbral seeds to make your own checkpoints. Just not put one in every flower bed you find though, because the game will trick you into using them, and then you walk 5 more seconds and you find the vestige point. Another trick the game uses is, and I always fall for this one because I'm a dumbass, is that there are fake items everywhere, and as soon as you pick them up, you get eaten by this piece of shit. Why? Cause fuck you, that's why. And I feel like that's the approach the devs took making the whole game. So they placed a bunch of dudes behind boxes, not just to attack you like in Dark Souls. Nah, here, they straight up push you to your death. It's so much fun. That's gotta be why the level design is so confusing. Seriously, it's horrible. I played tons of games and I never had to keep going online, not to look up guides on how to beat boss fights or what weapons and items are OP. Nah, I kept on going online to look up where to go next. And before some fanboy tells me it's cause I suck, cause I can already see them bitches coming, there are thousands of people looking up guides on where to go after each boss fight. Wanna know why? Cause this is what the map looks like. I wouldn't find my own house with this shit. And that's probably what makes exploration far from being enjoyable. Cause on Lords of the Fallen, 90% of the time I'm exploring just cause I'm lost. And I don't know about you, but what makes exploration even more enjoyable for me is when I get blocked by enemies and I die like this. Add to that a couple of shitty camera angles at the worst possible time, and you might break your controller, TV, and probably just burn the whole place to the ground. So this game can be incredibly frustrating at times, yet very rewarding and enjoyable when it's not annoying, which happens every now and then. In all seriousness though, I'm glad the devs addressed the enemy density issue and they toned it down a little bit. Enemy variety is still a problem though. Fighting the same enemies throughout the game with the addition of bosses and mini-bosses becoming regular enemies isn't fun. Another thing that's not fun is PvP. I played offline because I've had enough PvP invasions to know that I'm not interested in those. Speaking of stuff I'm not interested in, let's talk about the story and characters. I played this game for about 50 hours and I can't name one character. The only thing I remember is there are beacons and I need to cleanse them. That's how unmemorable and uninteresting the story is.
Tried, oh God. You know that better than anyone.
This is basically me listening to the dialogue in this game.
Crusader.
Huh?
My name is Dunmire.
What?
And I am an exactor of the Dark Crusaders.
Oh. Okay.
With all its flaws, Lords of the Fallen is still fun. Very fun if you like Souls-like games. It's got some interesting new Game Plus options, plenty of builds you can try out, so it's extremely replayable. Oh, and it supports crossplay, so you can play it on online co-op with a friend, regardless of what platform they're on. And with that, I think it's time to move on to the verdict. No matter how much it would piss me off, I would stop playing Lords of the Fallen for a couple of days, then I would think about it, give it another shot and have a little bit of fun. And finally I would get pissed off again and remember why I stopped playing it in the first place. So over 30 updates later, is Lords of the Fallen good now? If you love it, you'll overlook its flaws, but in my opinion, Lords of the Fallen is not really a good game. It's still only an above average game and that's why I'ma give it a 6.5 out of 10. If you're considering picking this up through Game Pass, go for it, but I wouldn't recommend buying it unless you can get it for like 15 bucks. Otherwise, just get the Elden Ring DLC when it's out. At least that's what I would do. And that's gonna be it for my Lords of the Fallen review. I hope you found it helpful. Please don't forget to leave a thumbs up if you did and help revive this dead channel with a subscription. It's been Hitman89. See you guys very soon.
I will not stop, I am prepared to get to the top, yeah, you must beware. Got 'em like, hey.
What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an update of sorts about Lords of the Fallen, a Souls-like that released in the later half of last year, October to be specific, and at that time, and to this day, the game had a very mixed reception. Some people enjoyed it a great deal, others not so much, and if you watched my own review of this title, you might remember that while I enjoyed what it was trying to do, I agreed that it had more than its fair share of issues, and that I would would suggest most people hold off and wait until they had a lot of those problems ironed out before jumping into it. And now, about 6 months later, it seems to have received a final updates of sorts via its patch 1.5. Now, I don't think they've ruled out future DLC or anything, so I don't know if this will literally be their final update, but nonetheless, since launch and now, they've released about 30 updates for this game total, changing and tweaking all sorts of things. This most recent patch added a bunch of modifiers for New Game Plus options if you want, which allows you to adjust all sorts of things, even some that were a point of contention up to this point. So basically, I just wanted to touch base on this particular game and talk about some of those changes that have been made since then and how it is these days. Now, right out of the gate, and you might have seen this on screen a little bit already, is that for me, the game definitely still stutters. One of this game's issues when it launched was a fair few performance problems, especially with the multiplayer, and many of its updates have been centered around fixing exactly those things. Though the efficacy of those fixes is a bit debatable, as I've seen a lot of people saying that they have no issues at all with the game now, and I admit I'm not really running into any bugs anymore, simply that the game itself stutters pretty heavily and there doesn't seem to be much I can really do to avoid it. So that's definitely still a thing, at least in part, though overall technically the game does seem to be in a better place. But now let's talk about some of the things that have changed over the last 6 months. So one thing they did right around the time I was actually reviewing this game was balancing the difficulty and nerfing ranged attackers that would just be destroying you before you could even get to them, while also trying to fight off melee guys, especially when you were in the Umbral realm, and they did a lot to adjust those things. In particular, the New Game Plus cycles the game offered were originally much more stringent in that they would remove vestiges or places you could rest in all but a few places, but the patches made this a more gradual change, provided you don't use the modifiers, which we'll get to. But the gradual change was basically that over the course of a few New Game Plus cycles, the vestiges and where they were would slowly start to go down, as opposed to just suddenly being taken completely away. They also added the option to start what is called a New Game Plus 0, which is effectively restarting the game but keeping your current character, so enemies and things don't grow in strength, but rather you keep all of your progression. That one in particular was intended to help people 100% the game, which is interesting because this most recent update adds a bunch of more achievements for using the modifiers. Now, content-wise though, the game also saw a few updates, including a few new quest lines aimed at giving you new armor and sets. These were all themed around the game's major forces, Radiant, Infernal, and Umbral. And in addition to those new things, the boss weapon abilities also got improved. The bosses themselves saw additional move sets and AI added, and that's to say nothing of the 12 new spells that were added, and magic was already very good, so that's a surprising change to me. And even just flashy stuff like extra finishers. All of that, though, is to say nothing of the quality of life improvements that have been brought to the game, such as the ability to store items, which keeps you from piling up items in your inventory, which can get out of hand pretty quickly. They've done a lot of work in particular to remove that issue. They've also allowed for you to reset your appearance and even rebind controller keys. So over the course of the last few months, the game has made substantial strides in the right direction, but that brings us to the big feature from this latest patch, which is game modifiers. Basically, they took all of those things that people were concerned about in terms of the game's balancing, and they allow you to add those to a playthrough as a modifier of some sort. This includes things like affecting the enemy density of the title, as they had to reduce this because the enemy density on launch was just insane, and they pulled that back. But now, if you preferred the more option, you can turn that on. We also have options like random loot, randomized enemies, the vestige decay, that is to say removing the extra vestiges from the game like you would see in normal New Game Plus cycles, and then even more difficult things like Iron Man or Withered Healing. Dying in Iron Man mode resets the game's world progression but not your character. So you can sort of keep trying until you get it right and retain your player levels and things. I imagine this will ease some frustration for that one. But then the Withered Healing one is interesting as well, because this makes use of the game's Withered mechanic. Some attacks will wither your health rather than take it away altogether. This turns a portion of your health bar white, and if you attack enemies at that time, you'll regain that health. Withered healing causes your normal healing to instead become withered, meaning you have to attack to actually get the healing, which certainly makes for more interesting boss fights to say the least. Though I am a little curious after playing around with that one for myself how true to form that actually is, because when you go to upgrade your main healing item, it mentions not having any healing at first at level 1, but then the next level up causes you to gain 20% HP, so I think that might not necessarily be as extreme as it seems on the face of it. But the cool thing about these is that you can turn on as many or as little as you please, and you do so right when you roll up a new game. But I will say that if you're completely unaware, when you beat the game with its various endings, you'll typically unlock a sort of advanced class that puts you at the beginning of the game in a much better position than you would normally be, which is a lot of the footage you're seeing on screen. And I imagine that's going to make people playing through the game again with those stronger classes that they can now choose if they've beaten the game previously on top of these game modifiers is likely where you'll see the most of the benefit for the content of this particular stuff. So it's with that exact thing in mind that I'm going to be taking those advanced classes through the game with these modifiers to grab the achievements that they added to the title with this update. But to sort of pull all that together and wrap this video up, overall, I would say that Lords of the Fallen seems to be in a much better place now than it was at launch. They've added a lot of cool stuff to the game to help people enjoy and even perhaps play through the game multiple times. They've adjusted and responded to a lot of player feedback in regards to the launch and afterwards. But in spite of that, all of the issues are not entirely gone. While performance is much better, it also definitely still stutters for me at least, and my PC's about as good as they get. On the consumer side of things anyways. So broad strokes, if you're interested in Lords of the Fallen, it is definitely better off now than it was at launch, but at the same time, if you didn't like what they had to offer initially, then I doubt this is going to change your mind on the matter. All in all, I would say that's pretty much everything for me. Mostly, I am happy to see that they put so much effort into sticking to what they said they were going to do, which is address all of these things and put out these patches. And while I simply don't think this game will ever be for everyone, as Souls-likes as a genre are very not for everyone by default, this one a little more so than usual. But I do think it's cool that they stuck with it, and I'm happy to see a lot of these changes personally. And if you've been wondering about this title, it's definitely in a better place than it was at launch. That is going to do it for this particular video though. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you
It's been 7 months since the release of Lords of the Fallen back in October of 2023, and there have been numerous updates during this time, with the main focus of many of these updates addressing a lot of the major concerns people had brought up. Enemy density was very close to the top, if not at the top of this long list of complaints, mainly focused around the amount of ranged enemies mixed in with a load of melee enemies, creating an experience that just felt overwhelming and annoying to most players. This has since been changed, and in some cases the number of enemies in areas has been reduced by 50 to even 70%. One can't help but wonder why so many enemies were added in the first place. This is likely due to the combat system in place, another point of contention people had with the game. The most likely reason for these high enemy clusters is due to the speed of combat and how quickly you can go from dodging to attacking, or vice versa. This lack of commitment in its attack is something that some players dislike, but it's also a very big attraction for a lot of players, and comes down to personal preference at the end of the day. This isn't a problem. In fact, being able to seamlessly swap between your combo attacks, going from one-handed to two-handed, from heavy to light, is an amazing feature that most players probably don't use, but just the fact that it's there is great. I wish they added more incentive into the very complex combat system, but there really isn't right now. The dedicated range slot is also an amazing feature that I wish other Souls games and Souls-likes did. Having an item that allows you to be a strength build while still having a minor focus on throwables or even spells that is just super easy to use is a highlight of this game's combat system. You can have bombs, spears, axes, and other items to throw at enemies, and if you end up equipping a crossbow instead of just going bare hand or a bow, all of these ranged options change to different arrows or bolts. This adds a good amount of depth in hybrid, ranged, and melee builds. There's also a spell system with over 70 unique spells, and that's pretty well done. I don't think anyone has complained about this system or this part of the combat. The problem with combat that people have is the lock-on system and forward momentum. These were a big problem in the early game. You see, the lock-on system snapped between enemies too quickly, which essentially led to your camera just spinning around the screen, making fighting large enemy groups very frustrating. Also, the fact that it didn't even lock on to the enemy in the center of your screen half the time. Combine all of this with the forward momentum that would easily make you fall off the ledges to your death, and you're not in for a good time. These have been changed now. Enemies are reduced, like I mentioned earlier, and the lock-on system has been changed to match more closely to a FromSoft game, meaning the targeting system is more industry standard, and you won't be getting a bunch of these weird camera movements that were there before. To top it all off, you no longer fall off ledges due to your attack. You can swing and attack all you want and you will never fall off a ledge. Period. You can even use this feature to go across narrow areas if you're afraid to walk across. So the core combat is pretty good and the major concerns have been addressed. But what about other concerns people had with regards to progression, level design, sound design, art, co-op, and of course, performance? Well, the newest update has made some changes that are huge quality of life improvements. Starting with progression. Lords of the Fallen is pretty standard with how you level up characters, and this hasn't changed much since release. You have your items that require a specific stat or two, and these stats are what the weapon scales with. So you just level up your character based on your stat build, and you're good to go. Want to be a Radiant Sorcerer that uses a one-handed Radiant Blade? Focus on that stat. Easy peasy. The major improvement here is the pre-upgraded loot modifier that you can add to the game. One of the major sins of all games in this genre is that build variety and testing different items has always been pretty bad. For example, you can get a new item, but you can't really use it right away since it's 6 upgrades behind your current weapon. Then it's pretty common that when you finally upgrade it, it ends up being worse than the weapon you were already using, or you just don't like how it plays. This makes testing different and wacky builds hard. There are things done to mitigate this, but as far as I know, none of them actually have this pre-upgraded loot modifier. This is great because it can get you item drops relative to your current gear. I ran around with my max level character and a new level character to test how the drops work, and they appear to scale properly at all times. For example, I only got plus 10 items on my max level character. Max weapons are normally hard to obtain, since Lords of the Fallen also has the same weapon progression problem that other games in this genre have, but now, with this, it's much better. The level design hasn't really changed since release. This is both good and bad. It's always had this interconnected world that is just really cool and fun to see how all the different areas connect. Especially when you unlock a route that connects you back to an area you were at like 10 hours ago. Axiom and Umbral are the two worlds, where Axiom is normal and alive, and Umbral is this blue area filled with dead giants and ghouls. These two areas work together for some interesting designs, with some puzzles and gimmicks mixed in as well. The best part is you can access Umbral at any time, and even peer into this world with the lamp. Oh, and of course there's no loading screens at all when you're traveling around. The newer changes come along with the New Game Plus modifiers, but you can also use these modifiers on a brand new character. The vestiges are these game's bonfires, and in subsequent runs there was vestige decay, meaning that there will be less of these bonfires every single time you start a New Game Plus. This was not optional before, but now it is, allowing you to customize them as much as you want. There's also a New Game Plus 0, where you start the game again with your character and all their upgrades, but the bosses and enemies don't get harder, making it very easy for achievement hunting or just messing around. I also wanted to mention this here, since these seedling systems are these temporary bonfires or vestiges, you can only have one seedling active at a time, but you can keep it there as long as you want once you've planted it, and you can use it as much as you want. The problem arose with where you could use these seedlings, and that you could only have a total of 5 at a time in your inventory. This meant that players might use a seedling in the wrong place, wasting their precious resource. Combine that with them costing 2,500 vigor, this game's upgrade currency, and it wasn't great. Not to mention, the placement or locations of where you can plant the seeds is pretty random. Some are within a couple meters of each other, some are just completely and utterly useless, being right beside a vestige or shortcut that takes you back to a vestige, and some are just extremely good, almost essential at specific parts of the game. So the quality of the placement of where you can plant them varies greatly. So what's been done to improve this? Honestly, not too much. The price of a seedling has been halved to 1,200, and now you can have as many as you want. There is no limit of only 5. Additionally, drops have also been improved. Before, bosses were basically the only enemy where you could get this from, but now I've gotten some to drop from other locations. With this increased access and how you're able to get them, and the fact that you're actually able to save them up, makes the system work a bit better. Sound design is another problem people had with the game, particularly parry and grievous strike sounds. These have both been changed a bit, and they do sound better than when they did on release. The other sounds and musics are still the same, but these were pretty good, and there are some memorable boss songs and whatnot. Nothing too noteworthy here, it's just well done overall in my opinion. As for art, the game still looks great graphically, and from a technical standpoint, is still one of the best, if not the best looking game in this genre. While talking about art, I might as well bring up enemies. These look great, but I thought I'd also mention this now as well, and that's the enemy variety. One of the biggest draws of this update is the enemy randomizer. Enemy randomizer mods are some of the most downloaded mods for all Dark Souls games and other similar games. Having an enemy randomizer built into Lords of the Fallen is just great. This allows for console players to actually enjoy a feature like this, and PC players not needing to download a mod. So it's all the fun without the headache or bugs. Continuing with enemy variety, I believe Lords of the Fallen has a good amount of enemies. Many players have mentioned the lack of enemies, and this is partly true. Just for comparison's sake, Lords of the Fallen has about the same amount of enemies as Demon Souls. From counting through the wiki, it actually appears to have a little bit more. Yes, there are repeats, but that's the case for both games. The problem is since Lords of the Fallen is around 50% longer for a base game run, and over twice as long for a 100% completion, you notice this enemy variety, or lack of, a lot more. There's not much else to say, it's mainly up to you to decide on how you feel about enemy variety in the game. As for co-op, this game launched poorly. Multiplayer was very buggy and didn't work well, if at all. Since then, there have been many changes, and I've actually had some fun playtesting. The co-op is now really good. The fact that you're able to summon someone or join a world, and then you can stay there as long as you want, is amazing. This allows for the entire campaign to be played with another friend if desired. Netcode and everything worked really well. There were a few issues here and there, but nothing major. There are limitations though. The host can still do literally everything, but the person who joins is unable to pick up most items in the game, meaning they'll fall behind when it comes to gear, weapons, and all other items. The person who joins though is never able to lose their vigor though, so they're most likely to pull ahead in levels compared to the host who loses them upon death, assuming they don't recollect the lost vigor of course. As far as combat and targeting and everything, I didn't see any bugs or anything there, so again, you can play the game pretty much flawlessly. And as far as dying goes, the host can revive the other player if they die as long as they have enough heals left, but the joiner can never revive the host. Overall, the multiplayer is solid. I would compare the co-op here to something like Remnant from the Ashes or Remnant 2, which is basically the best in this genre. Now, don't get me mistaken though, Remnant still works a lot better, with aspects like the host can die and the other people join can still play, as well as item drops and quest items working better in Remnant games, since people who join in those can collect like 99% of the item drops, and that isn't the case here. Both do have the issue where you can only progress in the host world, but when the person who joins leaves, they will be hours behind in their own personal save. Their character progress is saved though. This is not a huge issue as all host multiplayer games work like this, but I thought it was worth mentioning. The last and probably biggest issue is performance. Now, this is an odd one for me. I'm running a 3070 and have managed to play with 0 bugs or performance issues since day 1. And I've had OBS recording the entire time. As far as I can tell, people on hardware better than PS5 have little to no issues for the most part. There are some people I've heard running on a 40 series who still have performance problems though. The bad part comes up when talking about people on weaker hardware. Lords of the Fallen is a next-gen game, so the argument could be made that you need a next-gen PC. Now, minimum spec requirements are the lowest required to run the game at like 720p 30 FPS though, so take that as you will. As far as I can tell, the developers for Lords of the Fallen have done a lot to improve performance across the board, and it has worked in many cases, but there are still some issues. That being said, another thing of note is issues with Unreal Engine 5. Features such as Lumen and Nanite are still pretty early, and it has been documented to run poorly even on the best hardware. There are also known issues with Unreal 5 on specific graphic cards, mainly AMD cards, but those are issues outside of the control of the Lords of the Fallen dev team. So, in short, since release, Lords of the Fallen has had numerous changes to the game that have greatly improved and addressed the concerns of most players. Enemy density was reduced, combat systems improved, level design and quality of life improvements, the seedling system was slightly changed, new game plus modifiers, great visuals, an intuitive combat system, especially with ranged combat such as spells, and a fully functioning co-op experience. It still has performance issues and enemy variety is limited for some. I would say that Lords of the Fallen is a different game than when it released, and if you were thinking of getting it or you quit before, now or whenever the next sale is would be a good time to hop back in or try it out again.
Modern gaming feels like a chore. Oh boy.
Modern gaming has slowly begun to feel like a chore. And before you say something like,
I'm just growing out of the hobby, you're just getting older.
I don't feel this way towards older games that I am now playing for the first time, or several indie titles. Now this feeling mainly comes from the mainstream AAA games released over the last few years. And I know I'm not alone in this, as it's one of the most common topics brought up in forums and discussions in the broader gaming community.
I think the reason why is because of the focus on an achievement system. And the problem is, like, if you look at something like Armored Core 6, think about how many people criticized Armored Core 6 for not being a chore.
But it isn't just one or two niche communities that feel this way. Many different types of gamers are sharing a similar sentiment. And game development technology has only gotten better and better, and games have only become more and more ambitious. So from an objective standpoint, gaming should be better now than ever before. So why do so many gamers share this sentiment?
I think that gaming is better now than it was before. I think that by far. But I think that it's not if the only thing that you're consuming is AAA titles. Like, if you're going after and you're trying to find, like, for example, like, for me, how many games this year have come out that have been, like, really, really fun to play? Like, in the past, like, 6 months or so. Like, I've had Armored Core 6. Like, this game's been really fun. Blasphemous 2. I played that. Coffin of Andy and Laylee. Like, Death Must Die. Enshrouded came out recently. Dude, this game was so fucking fun. And I'm still not even done with it. Grand Blue Fantasy just came out. This game's really fun too. Like, I think there are so many great games, and I really wish that people would stop looking at the latest Ubisoft release and then basing their opinion of the gaming industry as a whole off of that. I'm so tired of that.
Again, there's always the...
You're outgrowing gaming. You're in this public past. You're just burnt out.
And while these are applicable to some, I don't think it fully represents the full picture, and the problem goes far deeper than those very surface-level explanations. So I want to look at that first point. Old games don't feel like a chore, but new ones do. Why? What's the difference between new and old game design that separate them from one another? Well, there's quite a lot actually, and we're not going to be able to cover all of them in this video, but one of the most important things to me is old games rarely wasted your time. They got you right into the action. Right into
yeah, and this is a big difference between like live service games and like just box games that you can play offline. There's no reason for Dark Souls to make it take a really long time for you to get a Black Knight Halberd, and it doesn't. Like, if you you could get one at the beginning of the game, right, from that one guy, and there's a really good drop chance for it. It's like what, 16, 20%, something like that, from the guy at the bottom of the next to the grass shield. It's really common, and if you don't get it, then you get something else. And like, think about Monster Hunter. The rarest items in Monster Hunter take you a fraction of a time. Actually, I don't know about the rarest items, but it's like that's some of the decorations. But like, for example, getting a mantle for like a hard boss, this is a fraction of the difficulty that it takes to get something in a live service game. Because live service games win based off of making you play the game longer, and games like Dark Souls or Monster Hunter win by making you love the game longer. And that's the difference.
Adventure. And other than Metal Gear Solid, most games didn't have hours of cutscenes, or tracking across open expanses of nothingness to get to the next point of interest. No fun and
Oh, I think that games like Shadow of the Colossus, I remember I watched my friend Jason play a lot of it. And there was a lot of time periods where like you were just kind of not doing anything. You were moving around from point A to point B. And I think that's okay. That's not really a big deal. It just depends on like how the game is designed and like what the focus of the game is. It's the atmosphere. Yeah, I think the atmosphere for a game is very important.
Or grinding XP. No climbing hundreds of towers to reveal the dark part of a map. And most importantly, nobody said things like,
you gotta spend at least 20 hours in this game before it gets good.
You know, you could tell
They said that about MMOs back in the day, and nobody plays them anymore.
That the game was gonna hook you. Let's take New Vegas and Starfield as examples. We're gonna compare the first 60 minutes of New Vegas versus the first 60 minutes of Starfield. In Fallout New Vegas, you get a brief intro cinematic to set up the world of Fallout and the main plot that New Vegas will revolve around. You immediately wake up in a doctor's house. He helps you set up your character stats and character creator. You stumble outside and begin talking to a few folks in town. You learn the basics of combat and survival from one of the characters. You then involve yourself in a conflicting quest to either help the town against a bunch of escaped convicts or help the convicts take over the town. And in the process of all that, you've learned about skill checks and branching quest design that will affect the game forever. And in the aftermath of whichever choice you choose, you now know almost everything you'll ever need to know for the rest of the game, and you've pretty much wrapped up your first hour of New Vegas right there. Obsidian then hands you the reins to just go play the game.
Just do whatever the fuck.
Freedom.
Yep.
In fact, you can wake up and run straight out of Good Springs immediately, if you wanted to. Now let's take a look at Starfield's first hour. You're gonna spend about 10 minutes slow walking while NPCs ramble to you. You pass out, you wake up, create your character stats, slow walk for another 10 minutes with more exposition dumping, fight off a group of pirates for about 20 seconds, slow walk, and then exposition dump some more, interact with your loading screen, your ship, walk around a barren planet, shoot a couple more pirates, and then somehow, after that first hour, the game becomes even more restrictive and slow. You're going to spend the next 3 hours doing nothing but slow walking and talking to NPCs to tutorialize you some more. Another 5 hours of fetch quests and radiant quests go by, and then by maybe hour 12 or 13, you have a similar level of freedom that you did after the first hour of New Vegas. By hour 12 in New Vegas, I'd be balls deep in uncovering a cannibalism conspiracy inside the Ultralux casino. Hell, even at hour 6, I'd already sent some ghoul...
Jesus. You know what YouTube should do? Is they should categorize every Starfield video as ASMR. They should make it to where, like on Twitch, if you play Starfield, you're in the ASMR category.
...into outer space. And games
just combine the two.
Feel like a chore when they waste your time, or they take too long to get going. And even when they do get going, it's not that good. And while not everyone feels like Starfield is a chore to play, I think it's more than safe to say that Starfield has been a very large disappointment for many for this very reason.
If you want to explore, you'll have to go to your menu, zoom out of the planet, zoom out of the star system, navigate to a correctly leveled star system and fast travel. Then you watch a loading screen, a landing animation, and walk in a straight line for 3 to 5 minutes until you reach a point of interest. Unfortunately, none of these points of interest are interesting. At best, you'll find a copy-pasted pirate camp, and at worst, you'll find a planet trait, which is useless unless you're trying to fully scan a planet, or a cave with a few alien enemies and basically nothing in it.
But Starfield...
I don't know how this happened.
It is just the most recent example of a game that wastes the player's time. We could discuss forever about the 20-hour feature films in the Sony PlayStation catalog, or the...
Hey, no, that's totally fine. Because people get that, like, and also the gameplay in God of War, I haven't played the new one, so I'm speaking secondhand here, but I've never heard a lot of bad stuff about it. It seems like people really like these games. I am not a disliker of cinematic games, but it's not the same as God of War, like, 2 or something like that.
And tedious gameplay design of Ubisoft titles, or other generic game studios. Or we could talk about live service games that every few months give players 30 hours of busy work.
New thing to do.
It doesn't matter the example, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Modern games that love to waste your time, and only focus on getting you to spend as much time as possible inside their game.
Yep.
Why? Well, because of a game.
Because they have a store and they want you to spend money in the store. And so the longer you play the game, the more likely you're going to open the store. And that's why a lot of loading screens have advertisements for things in the store.